Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Alpha. It is Friday, June 21st, and this week, Waymo recalls over 600 cars. A driver makes $80 a week, and how many passengers tip? Legal Rideshare breaks it down. And from Legal Rideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Brian Greening. Brian, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jared. Great to be back.
Great to be back. You're in Chicago. I'm in Eastern PA, and it is a scorcher here. I don't know how it is out in Chicago, but it is hot as hell here.
It has been a pretty warm week here. It's a little cooler today, but temperatures have been quite high and uncomfortable.
Well, that's good to know. I guess we're all suffering through it. I mean, tis the season, right?
That's right. The first day of summer was yesterday, so get used to it.
Oh yeah, that's right. Summer just started, and it's like this craziness. Okay, well, good to know. And speaking of hotness, we can go into some hot topics. This first one it's interesting, but I got to give them a little bit of props here. Waymo has recalled more than 600 self-driving cars. This is from Fox 10. They reported the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said in its report that last month a driverless Waymo vehicle hit a wooden utility pole in Phoenix while it was in an alleyway and trying to perform a low-speed pullover maneuver. Waymo has completed a software update that improves the automated driving system's response to poles or pole-like permanent objects, and also provided a map update to include a hard edge between the pole or pole-like objects and the drivable surface. Now, the reason I'm saying giving them some credit is, Brian, they did this voluntarily and said, hey, we're going to pull these cars and fix this.
Yeah, I'm glad that they recognized that there was a problem, got the cars off the road, hopefully with the eye on making this as safe as it can possibly be before reinstating the program. We've talked a lot in the past about the fact that driverless cars are just not ready. I mean, the technology is not ready to put them on the city streets. Thank goodness this accident involved a wooden object and not a person. But there's two ways to look at it. One, great job to Waymo for getting taking the problem seriously and pulling the vehicles from the road. But in the same vein, I'm not sure that those vehicles should have been there in the first place. You're out in Phoenix. You're not that far away from the desert. Let's create a city and test these cars out for a few years there rather than on our public ways.
Yeah, I know what they did, and it is good that they pulled the cars and did the software update. But, they're only in a small area right now, and if they start expanding, is it just going to be whack-a-mole with software updates for every single time there's a new pole or a cone or, hey, the road changed? I don't know how they get around that right now.
Well, that's the thing, is how many times can we update our software to correct these problems before somebody gets hurt? Like, this is not a computer bug where you play around with an app and, you get a report of something going wrong. Okay, we'll fix it. No big deal. These are huge vehicles on public roads where there's pedestrians, there's other vehicles, there's all sorts of ways that they can cause harm. And to just say, we'll correct the software, we'll fix the bug, that's too late. You're fixing a bug because you crashed into something, and eventually it's going to be a person.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's why they're just, hovering around Phoenix. But I do believe it's Waymo, correct, that has expanded to LA already, aren't they? Or San Francisco? Was it Waymo?
Yeah, I'm not sure which company it was, but I know that the driverless car companies are expanding, and they're putting their vehicles in more and more cities around the country. And honestly, one city's too much right now. Like, they don't belong on the streets until they're fully ready to go, until they can identify things with the same sorts of vigor and make the same smart decisions that people are forced to make behind the wheel all the time. Like, I understand that people are flawed and people get in car accidents, and eventually driverless cars will be a safer option than a person. But right now, I think that they need to have people in the vehicles making judgment calls and evaluating the environment as it changes. Like, when you're on the roads, the environment changes constantly, and the technology in the driverless vehicles is not caught up to that yet.
Right, and it's funny you brought something up that's actually really important. I think that's maybe why actually we're seeing a little bit more safety, and maybe arguably a little bit slower than just kind of steamrolling through regulations. Here is that, with the advent of rideshare, it had to be drivers. It was drivers behind the wheel. So Uber and Lyft often would just throw their hands up and say, "Well, that's what insurance is for, and that was the driver's fault. We're not responsible." But like you said, there's no driver. So if these things are crashing or hurting or killing people, you can't just point a finger and go, "Well, we didn't know anything about that," because it's your software, it's your hardware, it's your cars. And so this is gonna be tough. And I don't know when it's gonna be mainstream, but I know they're trying to push it.
It's going to be sooner than later. And I hope that it's safe when it is in each one of our cities.
Right. Likewise. Well, let's head to topic number 2. $80. That's about as much as 2 craft beers, but it's also about what one driver came home with after a solid week of work. This is from CNBC, and they reported, quote, when he and his wife divorced, he was earning less than $25,000 a year after taxes, alimony, child support, and other debt payments. In 2016, he decided to turn to ride sharing to make some extra money. Very interestingly, he wrote a memoir about all that followed. He said to earn a, quote, a decent hourly wage, he told CNBC, you're forced to work long hours at odd times and to rely on bonuses and tips to surge payments. He aimed to make $250 a week on the road, but said this wasn't always possible. After his car expenses, he earned just $80 in 1 week. So, same story, different memoir, right? I mean, it's pretty much what it is.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing over and over drivers complaining about how little they make, and the complaints are well-founded. Like, when you're bringing home $80 after expenses, can you even say that's worth your time? I mean, what's the purpose of spending all that time if he's got $80 in his pocket? What's he going to buy with that?
Right.
That doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't keep a roof over his head. I mean, it's hardly a trip to the grocery store. So it's disappointing. It's, unfortunately, a very common story. This is just another, as you said, another memoir of a driver who's struggling to get by and finding out that this is not a business that is, lucrative enough to make worthwhile.
Right, and he goes on to, because they interviewed this guy, and it's kind of sad too, because he said he had a full-time job with health insurance and a retirement fund, but he was due to a lot of these issues, I guess, in his life, and jumped to Uber. He said he was teetering on the brink of homelessness, and he even said, like, there's a sense that it shouldn't be so hard to get by. You blame yourself because everything in the American ethos tells you if you work hard, it leads to success, and if you're struggling, it must be your own fault. But as we know, and as drivers are pointing out, and as now facts are coming out, the whole work harder, you'll make the money that they're saying, it's just not real. It's just not happening, and so people they're getting burnt out.
Yeah, they're burning out, and they're realizing that they've upended their lives and their traditional employment situations for a promise that just can't be kept. Uber and Lyft, they advertise to drivers saying, you can make all this money, be your own boss. Well, at the end of the day, you're not making that much money. And as he pointed out, you're not really your own boss. In order to make a living wage, there are very specific times that you need to work. It's not really that flexible. Like, yes, you can decide I'm going to drive at this time, but not this time. But if you want to make money, if you want to earn enough to support yourself, you are really locked into nights. You're sometimes traveling very far away from home. It's not as flexible as the companies would have you believe if you want the job to work for you.
Yeah, and there's no longer, and I remember when I first started taking rideshare in 2016 and 2017, there was sort of this, a lot of the drivers that I would interact with to talk to were kind of doing this thing where they had errands to run for themselves and would pick up a passenger here or there along the way, and it was actually worth it for them just to do one or two. But like you said, yeah, you can kind of choose the hours, but you also are doing full days. It's not, you can't just pluck one or two rides and go, that's enough for the day, you might end up with no money after that. And so they're just burying themselves and saying, okay, 8 to 12 hours, let's go. This is the time, this is the place. And for some drivers, I guess they're okay with that. But from what we're seeing, even from these memoirs and reports, it's not flying. And people are getting tired of it.
Right. Yeah. It's the same story, different day. And it's unfortunately just the tale of the plight of the driver.
Yep. And for our final story, I'm going to stay along the money here. How often do passengers tip their drivers? A Business Insider reported, quote, after analysis of over 500,000 U.S. Gig drivers provided to Business Insider by Gridwise, they found that roughly 28% of Uber and Lyft ride-hailing trips get tips compared to 87% of food delivery trips and 74% of grocery tips. The analysis was based on U.S. tipping data between January 1st and June 6th. So huge discrepancies there, Brian. As we discussed, I believe, last week or the week before, most drivers rely on tips. And as we're seeing, they're just not getting them.
Yeah, it's Uber and Lyft have set up a pay structure where they're not paying the drivers enough, and they're saying, well, the passengers can supplement that by being generous. I first of all think that the companies should be paying the drivers more and not relying on the customers to make up that difference. But as this survey is showing, passengers are really not all that generous when it comes to extra cash. And I think part of it is not that there's an unwillingness to tip. I think it's a lot of a culture, the environment that we've created in terms of who gets tipped, who doesn't. By seeing that 87% of food delivery and 74% of grocery trips result in tips, I think we're used to giving a couple dollars to the person who brings something to our door. That's a common cultural situation, but there's not so much of a history in terms of tipping driver. I know a lot of people do, but it looks like 3/4 of people don't.
Yeah, they made a good point in this article too. I think one of the drivers said it. One of the other issues too is there's sort of this understanding by passengers that, look, I'm never going to see this driver again. So why I don't have to feel guilty about not giving tips because I'm never going to see him again. And even this one woman, Carrie, she was a driver since 2015. She said a few weeks ago she drove 90 trips and only got tipped for 6 of them. So there's sort of, I think it's this sort of mentality, like you said, when it comes to food, I feel like food and tipping has always gone hand in hand in American culture. And even though I guess, taxis, you tipped on taxis, but I guess there's sort of this idea of like, well, I'm never going to see you again. So sorry. I'm just, and it's already, the prices are going up. So I think that's what's happening.
Right. And that's again why it's so unfair to place the burden of paying the driver on the passenger, because the passenger is already paying quite a bit for that trip. I think what the ultimate solution here is when the passenger pays a top dollar for a ride, Uber and Lyft should be sharing more of that with the driver. And I think a lot of times the passenger assumes that when they get charged $40 for a ride, the driver is making a solid percentage of that, and thinking, well, this driver is getting paid handsomely because I'm paying handsomely. Well, that's just not the way that the system is set up.
No, it's not. And we discussed this in multiple articles. First, drivers pointing out that they aren't getting a lot of the money, which is, I think, good for passengers to understand. And the second thing is a couple months ago, we had discovered an article and discussed it on this podcast that when you actually pay drivers more, the service is better and customers stay longer and use it more often. Versus if you don't, and then the good drivers decide to leave because it's really not worth it, and so the people that are staying are people who are just like, whatever. It kind of is a race to the bottom. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the passengers are kind of in the dark, and rightfully so. They're not us. They're not doing research on this.
Right. And there's a lack of education, and it's ultimately hurting the drivers. And that's why you see things like Prop 22 pass, because Uber and Lyft are controlling the narrative, whereas the drivers are, continuing to suffer the recourse and repercussions, and the passengers are none the wiser.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's our stories for this week. Brian, I will give you the floor before we head off into the weekend.
Yeah, as always, we remind people heading into the weekend that Legal Rideshare is available for free consultations for any accident or injury claim. So if you're injured on the job, if you're injured as a passenger, we are happy to provide you with a free consultation, all the information that you need to protect your rights and make sure that you get paid if you sustain any damages, medical bills, pain and suffering, lost wages, you name it. Please don't hesitate to give us a call. And you can visit us at legalrideshare.com for all of our contact information.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And as I like to say, that is the end of This Week in Rideshare. See you next week.